having myself a Monte Cristo, one of my favorite Cubans. It's not the smoothest one, but it doesn't kick your ass either. This is a response video to all of those response videos I've been getting for my video on the problem of pacing I've been having, and boy, what a drove of response videos I've been getting. I'm really glad about that. Lots of excellent response videos. I'm gonna link them all in the description box of this video, and please, if you have any new insight or any of your own opinions, please make a response video. They're very welcome, and you know, that's the way we all get new insights. Some people were giving more practical advice, some people were giving more insight to their style that's not always directly applicable to my style, but still good insight and speaks to the diversity of our hobby and the community. You know, I was thinking that a lot of the people that are not around anymore from all those people that were around when I was actively posting years ago, you know, I kind of lamented that, but the community is pretty strong, you know, going full force, and there's a lot of good conversations to be had, and this is no exception. Good. Now, all the points, all the criticisms, and all the tips that I was given were great, and from those I've gathered a bunch that really helped me a lot, and really I'm going to be putting into practical use in my future campaigns. The first one is communication, which is kind of the groundwork of a lot of people's points when they started making their video responses, and to some people it was the main focus of their responses. Communication often is interpreted as basically people talking about what their characters are about, what the setting is about. Is the game going to be lethal or cinematic? Is it going to be very sandboxy or railroady? Is it going to be very rules light, rules heavy, or that sort of stuff? But what it usually doesn't really delve into is expectation. And when it comes to expectation, everybody who's made a character, you know, oftentimes has certain expectations of what they would like to do with that character, and if those things aren't brought up, they can easily end up in the midst of the campaign kind of finding themselves not fulfilled. They might find themselves that, oh, I really would have wanted to do more foresty stuff. I would have loved to been foraging around or hunting a wild game or something like that, and then all of a sudden the campaign is set on a city block. It's like, ugh, like, yeah, it's fun, but I really would have wanted to go into those woods. And if it's not brought up, the GM won't know that that's what you would like to do in the game. And, you know, a lot of people can always have that kind of a expectation where, oh, if I bring too many things of what I want to do, you know, up in the game, people might think that you're trying to, like, you know, too much, you know, assert yourself too much, and a lot of people have that kind of thing where they like to avoid conflict at any cost, to the point where they're pretty much extremely passive, like, whatever the GM wants, I'll do. And that's not always a good thing, because it's a collaborative, creative hobby. Everybody around the table is a creative person, and they have their own visions of what they want to have happen. So communication is the key. Communication is the key, not just to know what to expect, but also to let each other know what they would like to expect happen in the campaign. So that was an extremely good point. I like the video response Ivan and Mike made about it, especially, you know, if your expectations are one thing and then the campaign is something completely different, and then you're not having fun because it's not what you had in mind coming in, you know, you can have that cloud of negativity. Even if it's a small thing, it can create this kind of cloud of negativity around the table that kind of becomes contagious, and people will have this little bit of a kind of going around as the campaign goes around, and nobody really knows why, and it might be because of something very meager, but still, it's there. Another thing that got mentioned a lot that I'm really going to apply is the GM just taking a backseat. I've noticed that, especially with the way I described my original video, and a lot of ways that people responded to that, either telling that they do the same kind of thing, and it might be a concern to a lot of players or to a lot of people, is the throwing stuff at the players too much. The problem is that even when you give players that free time, and like I said in the original video, there might be that anxiety that it's not really free time because they're just, leisurely waiting for the next thing to be thrown at them. The stuff that gets thrown at them is often not just kind of random stuff that influences and kind of creates an air of improvisation and creativity, but instead it's always like, here's a scene, but the scene is tied to your character backgrounds. Oh, but the scene is also tied to some NPC. Oh, but the scene is also tied to the setting and to the tone and to the location and all that stuff, and all of a sudden you have a scene that has so many moving parts in it that a player might be very incensed, but they might feel like they don't really have that freedom. If they use too much of their own creativity, they might feel like they're stepping on toes. Like, if they kill off an NPC, it's like, well, I killed that NPC, therefore I killed an entire side storyline that had been, created and prepped, and everything was considered beforehand, and all this stuff, and it stifles creativity. And that's a bad thing in a creative hobby. So that's something I'm definitely taking into consideration as I go along with my style of play. And Runeslinger, for one, had a really good intake on that, about basically the GM just stepping back, shutting his mouth, and letting just. Here are the the outlines of where you are, and now you're free to do your own stuff. And when you let them do their own stuff to the point where they will underline stuff when they have the free time, and then they get to build on that. If they're just waiting for this thing to end, and then you're gonna jump in and just shove stuff at them again, they're not going to feel like whatever they kind of put forward and underline and kind of lay out is going to bear fruit in the long run, because everything is kind of thought out beforehand, or something at least to that extent. And a third point, which is pretty much my final point, is the point that Same Old G made about conditioning. I act in the theater, and I've worked with a director who was a very good director, but who was very strict, who directed every single movement you did on stage, all the way from the tone of your voice to the movement of your feet, the movement of your hands, every single thing you did, and it was all good. Everything he directed you to do was gold, and on stage it looked fantastic. The problem is that it very much kind of stifled creativity, and it created this kind of air of that there's very little trust between the director and the actor, and that really applies well to role-playing, and especially the thing that Same Old G was talking about conditioning. When you condition the players to always expect the storyteller to be the one who throws them a bone, who sets up every single scene and every single character moment, to where they won't be proactive and they won't put themselves to the forefront of everything, because they feel like, even if it's subconscious to a certain extent, because it's social dynamics around the table, they might feel that throwing stuff in there is gonna mess up plans, and if you want stuff, you just have to wait for the GM to give you stuff, and that's not good either. And I think that experience that I've had in the theater with a director like that the way I kind of dealt with it was to kind of bring it up, and then I was given more freedom to exert myself. And I think in my playstyle, I always do that, like where I will have a very strong narrative drive and kind of control, but I always invite players to take control as well. But it's very easy. It's very easy to imagine that the players naturally won't feel that what they're giving or what their initiative to give stuff, is kind of muddled by the GM asserting themselves too much. And I think the way to go forward for me with this is from now on, to, of course, have that communication, but also maybe build my campaigns in a way where the story won't be so involved, where I won't sink my fingers into every single scene, where I will take a step back and I will let the players build those character scenes for themselves, and I will adapt to them rather than expect them to adapt to my stuff. Because the story, as good as it might be at the end or in the long run, it's still about the fun of creating that story together. And while creating it, feeling that you have input on it, because it doesn't really feel all that satisfying. Go, okay, by the end, we created this great story, but was it fun creating it? It's always also this, that when you're throwing stuff at the players, if it's all your stuff, no matter how much you've created that stuff out of the player characters' backgrounds, it's still your stuff. If a character has a background that has like 3 facets to it, and you use 2 facets of those 3 in your main storyline, and that one facet gets kind of, underutilized, it might have been utilized quite well if the player had been in charge of the role of utilizing it. And even though I've always allowed for that freedom for the player to take the charge and shove their own player character stuff in it, it's a social scene we're in. People don't want to step on other people's toes. People don't want to upset anyone. People don't want to create conflict. So a lot of people will just kind of sit back and just like, oh, well, I kind of missed my boat on that, and maybe next time or something like that. No. It's not enough to expect the players to take charge. You have to create an environment where they will feel like it's natural for them to take charge. Not just for them to feel that they can create a natural character arc, but where they feel natural making that character arc. That way, you and I can become a lot better at this whole narrativist style that we love. From all the comments and responses that I got, where people were giving me whole different styles of role-playing, where that problem wouldn't come up, I appreciate that quite a bit, but I like the narrativist style to the point where I'm not willing to make a complete fundamental change, but I will sharpen it up. It's a tool of mine that I'm going to sharpen. It's starting to develop some rust on its edges, and I need to oil that up, and I need to sharpen it up. So there. I don't know how to end this, so how about I just end it?